They say he defied gravity, that he could twist his body midair like a dancer and land like nothing happened. They called him El Niño de Oro, the Golden Boy, and in the stadiums of Madrid, his bicycle kicks weren't just goals. They were fireworks. And yet, when people speak of the greatest, his name is often missing. No shrines, no statues, no golden farewell. Hugo Sánchez vanished from football's collective memory not because he wasn't great, but because greatness, in his case, wore the wrong passport. He wasn't Argentine. He wasn't Brazilian. He wasn't European. He was Mexican. And in the elite echo chambers of 1980s football, that made all the difference. He won 5 consecutive Pichichi trophies. He scored 38 goals in 38 games in a single La Liga season, every one of them with just one touch. He led Real Madrid's golden era, but history didn't shout his name. It barely whispered it. What happened to Hugo Sánchez? Why did a player so spectacular, so statistically superior, vanish from the narrative of football's gods? Some say it was ego. Others blame racism in football's old aristocracy. And some, quietly, mention a single broken promise that tore everything apart. This is not just a story of goals. It's the story of a man who flew and was never truly welcomed when he landed. To understand Hugo Sánchez, you must first understand where he came from and what he had to break through just to be seen. Born in 1958 in Mexico City, Hugo grew up in a household where precision mattered. His father, a professional footballer and military man, enforced both athletic discipline and academic achievement. Hugo didn't just train with a ball, he trained his body with gymnastics. From a young age, he could flip, twist, contort. What others found impossible, he found instinctive. He studied dentistry at university, thinking football might not last. But football did more than last. It exploded. In the late 1970s, Mexican football was not seen as a global force. South America had Pelé, then Maradona. Europe had Platini, Rummenigge, Van Basten. But Mexico? Mexico was considered exotic, enthusiastic perhaps, but not elite. For a Mexican striker to dream of conquering Europe was near heresy. And yet, Sánchez had that dream. After dazzling at UNAM Pumas and winning the CONCACAF Champions Cup, he made a daring move in 1981, crossing the Atlantic to sign with Atletico Madrid. He was 23, confident and instantly controversial. Spanish newspapers called him arrogant. Teammates whispered about his obsession with perfection. He was lean, dark-haired, explosive, and he smiled like he knew something no one else did. It was in La Liga, against the world's best defenders, that Sánchez began building his silent empire. But it wasn't easy. Spain at the time was still shaking off the shadows of Franco's regime. Racism, elitism, and nationalism ran deep in football. Latin Americans were either adored or dismissed, depending on their passport. Argentinians were viewed as genius. Mexicans? Not so much. But Hugo didn't care. By the mid-1980s, after a bittersweet spell with Atletico, he made the audacious move across town to Real Madrid. And that's where history was supposed to change. Between 1985 and 1990, Hugo Sánchez became a monster of statistics. 5 consecutive Pichichi trophies, top scorer in La Liga. A total of 208 goals in 283 matches for Real Madrid. La Liga champion 5 times, UEFA Cup winner. Copa del Rey. He didn't just score, he stunned. His goals weren't opportunistic tap-ins, they were ballets in the sky. His bicycle kicks became legend, not 1 or 2, but dozens. They weren't flukes. They were choreographed moves from a man who practiced flight. And yet, despite the numbers, something felt off. While Platini was hailed as Europe's intellectual on the field and Maradona was crowned a god, Sánchez remained an outlier, admired but not embraced. He was never in the Ballon d'Or conversation. He wasn't the face of Nike ads. No hand of God, no tearful farewell, just goals, then silence. Some say it was his personality, too bold, too confident, too self-promoting. He once said, "I am better than any striker in Europe. The numbers prove it." In another quote, "If my name were Hugo Sánchezini, I'd be on every magazine cover." But others whisper of more dangerous things. The politics inside Real Madrid, the unspoken elitism of UEFA, and the resistance from European press to ever place a Mexican above the sacred pantheon. Even in his own country, admiration was mixed with criticism. He didn't always shine in the Mexican national team, especially during World Cups. Fans expected magic, and sometimes got shadows. Still, beneath all the noise, one truth remained. Hugo Sánchez was rewriting what it meant to be a Latin striker in Europe. He wasn't just good, he was unstoppable. But then, as quickly as he rose, things began to shift. Tensions grew, rumors spread, the media turned colder, the goals kept coming, but the applause grew quieter. What happened? For a man who ruled La Liga like a monarch, whose name once echoed in the Santiago Bernabeu like a battle cry, Hugo Sánchez's fall came not with a bang, but with an unsettling fade. By 1989-90, he had reached an almost mythical peak. 38 goals in 38 games, a perfect one-touch masterpiece at every weekend. No other striker in Europe, not even Van Basten or Stoichkov, could match the ruthless elegance of Hugo in that season. Every goal was clinical, choreographed, beautiful, and every week he celebrated with a mid-air somersault, a gymnast's bow to the gods of football. But behind the scenes, a storm had begun to brew. In the press, the tone had shifted. Spanish media, once dazzled by his acrobatics, began to call him divisive. Rumors surfaced of dressing room conflicts, whispers that some teammates felt overshadowed, that his ego, his perfectionism, had become isolating. He demanded excellence, not just from himself, but from everyone. And not everyone appreciated that. More damning were the murmurs inside Real Madrid's boardroom. Though Sánchez was still scoring, his age was rising. And in an institution obsessed with its own image, the idea of a Mexican striker, not Spanish, not European, remaining the face of their empire, started to feel inconvenient. Worse, there was a contract dispute. Sánchez believed he deserved more, not just financially, but in respect. A renewed long-term deal, a stronger voice in the team. But Real Madrid, like many great empires, doesn't negotiate with legacy, it replaces it. Then came a brutal twist. Injury. A torn tendon in 1991 began the physical unraveling. He returned, but something had changed. The spring in his leap dulled, the explosiveness faded. Still elegant, still brilliant, but not feared. In 1992, Real Madrid let him go. No farewell gala, no statue, no official tribute for the man who had delivered them 5 consecutive league titles. Just silence. He signed with Club America back in Mexico, but it wasn't the same. He floated between teams, Rayo Vallecano, Atlante, even a stint in Austria and the MLS. Like many once invincible stars, he kept chasing the echo of past greatness, even as it faded further behind him. Meanwhile, international redemption eluded him. In 4 World Cups with Mexico, Hugo never delivered the golden moment fans had prayed for. Injuries, tactical mismatches, and misfortune conspired against him. In 1986, the year Mexico hosted and the nation dreamed, Hugo failed to score a single goal. Maradona lifted the trophy. Sánchez lifted questions. The public turned. Once idolized, he became polarizing. Critics painted him as selfish, too focused on self-glory. Others defended him, calling him a victim of systemic bias, the lone Mexican trying to carry a broken system. As a manager, he tried to return, even coach the national team. But the results were mixed, the pressure unforgiving. Sánchez couldn't recreate the magic from the sidelines. Fans now saw the man, not the myth, and they weren't always kind. In one haunting interview, he said, "I gave everything, but I think football never truly accepted me." That, more than the goals, defined his fall. Not just physical decline, but rejection. By the institutions, by the media, by the very history he helped shape. He didn't crash, he evaporated. There's a certain type of silence that haunts champions. Not the roar of defeat, but the stillness of being forgotten. For Hugo Sánchez, the silence became louder than any cheer he once received. After the brilliance, after the somersaults, after the goals that rewrote statistics, came a void that no one expected, least of all him. In interviews years later, there was a bitterness in his voice. Not angry, but wounded. "I was never part of the club," he once said about Real Madrid. "I just scored their goals." It was a devastating truth. He had become the greatest foreign striker in their history, and yet to them, he was always just that, a foreigner. There are those who believe Hugo was punished not for what he lacked, but for what he was. Confident, unapologetically Mexican, and unafraid to declare his greatness. In a football culture that idolized humility, or at least the appearance of it, Hugo's self-assurance was seen as arrogance. He spoke often about his legacy, his place in history. He reminded the world of his records. That rubbed some the wrong way. But maybe he had no choice. In a sport where South Americans were exoticized and Europeans celebrated, Hugo stood outside the narrative. He didn't have the tragic poetry of Maradona, nor the philosophical aura of Platini. He wasn't controversial enough to be hated, nor quiet enough to be pitied. He was clinical, efficient, unrelenting, and that made him easy to erase. But deeper than fame and football, there was pain. In a rare candid moment, Sánchez spoke of his daughter's death, a devastating loss that shattered him personally. In 2004, his daughter Erica passed away at just 8 years old due to respiratory failure. "She was my light," he said, "and when she left, so did part of my soul." No trophy could numb that kind of agony. And suddenly, all the forgotten accolades, all the snubs, all the erasures, they mattered even less. The media barely mentioned it. Football moved on. Sánchez retreated from the spotlight. He attempted coaching again, the Mexican national team, then Almeria in Spain, but nothing ever lasted. His name became more of a trivia answer than a living legacy. Who was the first Mexican superstar in Europe? A journalist once asked a young player. The reply? Chicharito. The question hurt more than the answer. Even in FIFA tributes and Real Madrid's anniversary content, his image is rarely shown. Raúl, Ronaldo, Benzema? Yes. Hugo? Sometimes, if convenient. But in truth, his fall was never due to failure. It was due to selective memory. Football remembered the drama of Diego, the magic of Zizou, the rage of Cantona, but not the acrobat who scored without scandal. And that's the cruel irony. Hugo Sánchez was too clean, too precise, too unrelatable. His greatness didn't bleed, it soared, but he flew too high. And when the lights turned off, no one looked up anymore. There's something deeply unsettling about Hugo Sánchez's story. Not because he failed, but because he didn't. He did everything a footballer is supposed to do, broke records, led dynasties, inspired generations. And still, the game he helped shape barely remembers to say his name. It forces us to ask the uncomfortable question, what does football really reward? Is it brilliance or branding? Is it skill or scandal? Is it the roar of the crowd or the drama that keeps them entertained? Because Hugo Sánchez had brilliance. He had skill. He had records that would make Ballon d'Or winners blush. And yet he's remembered, if at all, as a footnote, not a headline. Maybe it's because he never had a signature controversy. Maybe because his goals didn't come with a cigarette or a confession. He didn't cry on the pitch. He didn't brawl in bars. He didn't self-destruct. He just scored. And for that, he was forgotten. We also have to confront something darker. Was Hugo Sánchez a victim of football's unspoken hierarchy? Would a European striker with identical stats have been canonized? Would an Argentine with that flair and flair alone be on every top 10 list? Sánchez was too Mexican for Europe's taste, too European for Latin America's emotion. He lived in between, too good to ignore, too foreign to celebrate. But there's also blame to go around. Some say Hugo's obsession with being recognized made him difficult to embrace. That his constant comparisons to other stars alienated him from fans who wanted humility over honesty. He wanted to be loved like Maradona, but he didn't bleed like him. He wanted to be praised like Platini, but he wasn't political enough. Still, is it so wrong to ask for what you've earned? What's most tragic is that Hugo Sánchez never got a moment. No testimonial match. No tearful farewell in front of 80,000. No final bicycle kick under the Madrid lights. The question we must ask is this: did we forget him too soon? Or did we never really see him at all? Because in a game that immortalizes chaos, Hugo Sánchez offered control. In a world that rewards drama, he offered discipline. And in a history that honors legends, somehow, he was left out. So maybe it's time we ask ourselves not just what makes a legend, but who gets to decide? Time has a cruel habit of rewriting the stories we don't pay attention to. Hugo Sánchez never vanished. He was always there, in the highlight reels of purists, in the memories of Madridistas old enough to remember grace in motion, in the black and white clips of a man leaping sideways as the world stood still. He didn't just score goals, he choreographed them. He didn't just win trophies, he built an era. And he didn't just represent Mexico, he redefined what it meant for a Mexican to conquer Europe. But history isn't written by stat sheets, it's written by voices. And for too long, those voices forgot to speak his name. And yet, for those who still remember, who still feel goosebumps when they see that somersault celebration, who recall the quiet dignity of a man chasing perfection. Hugo Sánchez remains unforgettable. A legend not lost, just misplaced in the archives of time. Today's football may never truly echo the silence that followed his departure. But in every acrobatic goal, in every striker who dares to make beauty out of physics, in every player from outside the traditional powers who dreams of making it in Europe, Hugo lives on. He may not have had a statue, but he left footprints in the air. Some legends are told in stories. Others, like Hugo Sánchez, are remembered in flight.